It was standing in the corner of my room again, and this time it didn't work for me to fall asleep first. I want you to understand what I mean when I say it was tall. Not tall like a person ducking under a doorframe. Taller than that. Its head was inches from touching my ceiling, and my ceilings are 8 feet high. It had no real shape to it, no clothing, no face, just a column of pure black, darker than the darkness around it. Like someone had cut a person-shaped hole directly out of the room. I'd woken up to it standing there so many times by that point that I almost didn't react. Almost. But that night was different because for the first time in 4 months of this thing showing up in my room, it took a step toward my bed. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I stared at it through barely open eyes, praying it would think I was still asleep. And it just stood there, closer than it had ever been, close enough that if it had arms, and I'm still not sure it did, it could have reached me. I don't remember falling back asleep that night. I only remember waking up at 6 a.m. with my alarm, and it was gone, like it always was gone by morning, like it had never been there at all, except for the fact that I knew it had been standing 3 feet from my bed just hours earlier. That was the night I finally understood this thing wasn't going to just watch me forever. Something was building, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it, because how do you even explain something like this to another person without sounding insane? Let me back up and tell you how this actually started, because it didn't begin with it standing over my bed. It began so much smaller than that, and looking back now, I think that's exactly the point. It never wanted to scare me all at once. It wanted me to get used to it first. I was 26 when this started, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an older building, the kind with creaky floors and radiator heat that clanked at night. I'd lived there almost 2 years at that point without a single strange thing happening. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories usually go. Some new house, some obviously cursed old property. This wasn't that. This was a normal apartment I'd been perfectly comfortable in for 2 years. The first time I saw it, I almost didn't register it as anything at all. I'd woken up in the middle of the night needing water, and as I sat up in bed, I caught for just a fraction of a second what I thought was a shadow near my closet door, cast by a car passing outside. I didn't think anything of it. I got my water, went back to sleep, and forgot about it completely by morning. The second time was about a week later, and this time I was more awake when I saw it. It was maybe 2 in the morning, and I'd woken up for no reason I could identify, just suddenly awake, the way you sometimes are. I turned my head toward the door, and there was a shape standing in the corner between my closet and the wall, not moving, just standing. I remember my first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion, because my brain kept trying to make it into something ordinary. A coat I'd hung somewhere strange, a pile of laundry, a trick of the streetlight through the blinds. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds, and none of those explanations held up, because the shape had a distinct outline, human proportions, shoulders, the suggestion of a head, and it was darker than anything else in the room, darker than shadow has any right to be. I turned on my phone flashlight. The corner was empty. I told myself I'd been half asleep, that my brain had manufactured a shape out of nothing the way brains do in that specific groggy state between sleep and waking. I actually felt kind of embarrassed about it, the way you do when you scare yourself over something that turns out to be nothing. I went back to sleep without much trouble. It happened again 4 nights later. Same time, roughly 2 in the morning, same spot, the corner between my closet and the wall. This time I was more certain I wasn't dreaming because I distinctly remember the specific ache in my lower back that told me I'd been lying in the same position for a while. The kind of detail dreams don't usually bother including. I stared at it longer that time, maybe a full minute, willing my eyes to adjust and turn it into something explainable. It never did. Eventually I worked up the nerve to reach over and turn on my bedside lamp, and by the time the light clicked on, the corner was empty again. I mentioned it to my friend Priya over coffee that weekend, mostly as a joke, the kind of story you tell to get a laugh. Ha, my apartment might be haunted. She didn't laugh the way I expected. She asked a lot of questions actually, whether I'd been under a lot of stress, whether I was sleeping enough, whether I'd been drinking more than usual. All reasonable questions. All questions I'd already asked myself. The stress explanation made the most sense to me at the time, since I had in fact been under a lot of pressure at work that month, and I decided that was probably what was happening. Sleep-deprived brain, stressful month, the mind playing tricks. I felt better having a reasonable explanation, even if it wasn't fully satisfying. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened, and I genuinely believe the explanation had been correct. I started sleeping better once a stressful project at work wrapped up, and the shape didn't return. I remember specifically feeling relieved, thinking whatever combination of exhaustion and anxiety had caused it was simply gone, now that the stress was gone. Then it came back, and this time there was no ambiguity about what I was seeing, because I was fully, completely awake when it appeared. I was lying in bed, reading on my phone, maybe 11 at night, wide awake, lights off except for the phone screen. I looked up toward my closet out of nothing more than habit at that point, almost checking, and it was there, standing in the exact same corner. I hadn't been asleep. I hadn't just woken up disoriented. I was sitting up, phone in hand, fully conscious, and there was a tall black shape standing motionless in my bedroom. I didn't move for what felt like an extremely long time. The shape didn't move either. I finally worked up the courage to say something out loud, which in hindsight seems like a strange instinct, but I asked, quietly, "Is someone there?" Nothing happened. No response, no movement, nothing. I reached over and turned my lamp on as fast as I could, and by the time light filled the room, the corner was empty, the way it always was. That was the night I stopped being able to explain this away as stress or sleep deprivation, because I had been completely, undeniably awake. Over the following weeks, it started appearing more frequently, not every single night, but often enough that I started to dread going to bed, which is a strange thing to say about your own bedroom, a place that's supposed to be the safest room in your home. Sometimes it appeared in the same corner by the closet. A few times it appeared near the foot of my bed instead, which somehow felt worse, closer, more deliberate. It never moved while I was watching it directly. It seemed to only shift position when I looked away or blinked, so that I'd glance back and it would be standing somewhere slightly different than before, never having visibly walked there. I want to be honest that I seriously considered, whether something was wrong with me. I looked up sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, all the medical explanations for exactly this kind of experience. Some of what I read matched what I'd initially seen, those first couple times when I was half asleep. None of it explained the night I'd been fully awake, reading on my phone. None of it explained the growing sense, night after night, that whatever this was, it wasn't a symptom happening inside my head. It was something standing in my room, watching me, patient in a way that felt deliberate rather than random. I finally told my sister about it, mostly because I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind keeping it to myself. And unlike Priya, my sister didn't immediately reach for a medical explanation. She asked me a question that stuck with me ever since. She asked whether it ever felt like it wanted something, or whether it just felt like it was watching. I remember sitting with that question for a long time before answering, because I hadn't consciously separated those two possibilities before. And the answer, when I actually thought about it, was that it had always, from the very beginning, felt like watching. Patient, unhurried, entirely focused on me specifically, the way you'd watch something you were waiting for. That answer didn't make me feel better. Around the 2-month mark, I made the decision to set up my phone on a tripod facing my bed overnight, hoping either to catch something on camera or to finally get concrete proof that nothing was there at all, which honestly would have been the more comforting outcome. I did this for 6 consecutive nights. On 4 of those nights, nothing unusual happened. No shape appeared to my waking eyes, and the footage the next morning showed an unremarkable, empty room the entire night. On the 5th night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to find the shape standing in its usual corner. I didn't move, didn't reach for my phone at the time, just watched it the way I'd started doing, some strange numbness having replaced the initial fear by that point. It stood there for what felt like several minutes before I finally drifted back to sleep, not intentionally, just exhaustion winning out over vigilance. The next morning, I reviewed the footage with my hands actually shaking. For most of the night, the video showed exactly what I expected: my dark, quiet bedroom, myself asleep in bed, nothing else. Then at 2:14 a.m., time-stamped clearly on the recording, The corner of the room where I'd seen it noticeably darkened. Not a shape exactly, nothing with clear edges or form the way I perceived it with my own eyes, but a section of the frame that was measurably, visibly darker than it should have been given the ambient light in the rest of the room. Darker than the closet door beside it, darker than the shadow it was supposedly part of. It lasted, according to the timestamp, almost 11 minutes, before gradually fading back to match the rest of the dim room. I showed the footage to both Priya and my sister. Priya, to her credit, admitted she didn't have an explanation for what we were looking at, something she hadn't been willing to concede before actually seeing it herself. My sister barely said anything at all, just watched it twice through in silence. I want to tell you that I moved out immediately after that, but the truth is more complicated than that, the way these things usually are. I couldn't afford to break my lease with only 4 months left on it, and every part of me that wasn't terrified at 2 a.m. felt embarrassed at the idea of explaining to a landlord, or to anyone really, why I needed to leave early. So I stayed, and the shape kept appearing, on and off, for those remaining months, right up until the night it finally took that step toward my bed, the night I told you about at the very beginning of this. After that night, I didn't wait for my lease to end. I called my landlord the next morning, told him I had a family emergency requiring me to relocate immediately, paid whatever penalty he asked for, and moved into my sister's spare room within the week. I never told him the real reason, and I still don't know what I would have said if he'd asked for more detail. It's been almost 3 years since I left that apartment, and I've never experienced anything like it since, not once, not in any of the places I've lived after. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it chose that specific corner of that specific room, or why it took 4 months before it finally moved toward me instead of simply standing there. I don't know if it was ever actually dangerous, or if it just wanted me to believe it might be. I've looked into the building's history since then, out of a curiosity I couldn't quite let go of, and found nothing. No reported deaths, no obvious tragic history, nothing that would explain why that particular corner of that particular room seemed to be exactly where it wanted to stand. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, in that same apartment, waiting in that same corner for whoever lives there now. I think about reaching out to the current tenant somehow, asking if they've seen anything, and then I always talk myself out of it, because some part of me doesn't actually want to know the answer. I have that footage saved in 3 different places, and I still watch it sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, half hoping it will finally make sense to me, and it never does. I still sleep with a light on, somewhere in the room, every single night, in every place I've lived since. My sister says I probably always will now, and she's probably right. Some things you don't come back from believing, even after they're gone, even after you've told yourself, more times than you can count, that it's over.